Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, perhaps the never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Rob casting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 996. Now, for those of you who are still interested, coming up soon, the 1000th episode of Robservations. It's going to be 1,000 minutes long, which is over 16 hours. I'm going to be on, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be turning it over mostly to you imagination connoisseurs. And if you want to be on the show, send me an email to rmburnett, rmburnett1701 and put in the heading Robservations 1000 and tell me what you want to talk about. And I'm going to have people come on. I'm going to work up a schedule. And for the 1000th show, I'll be talking to you imagination connoisseurs. I'm going to drop in some interviews as well, but I'm going to be talking to you. Now, tonight's show is going to be atypical for Robservations. I'm going to get into politics. I'm going to get into some things that I think. I'm going to get into some things that might be controversial that you might not like, but people keep asking me about the election and who I'm voting for and what my politics is, and I figured, now is as good a time as any. I had a really good day today. We basically finished the episode 1 of True Noir, the assassination of Anton Cermak, the audio drama that I have been producing, directing, and editing since, we started really in earnest at the end of May, when the first person we recorded was Anthony LaPaglia in Sydney, Australia. He plays Al Capone in episode 4. And of course, it was written by Max Allan Collins, the Mystery Writers of America Grand Master, based on his novel True Detective. And I am as proud of it as anything I have ever done. I think it's amazing. But you know what? Far be it for me to say that. It really is up to the audience to decide whether something is amazing. I've always often thought, when I was at the Evergreen State College before I moved to California, went to USC, Evergreen's a very crunchy, chewy granola school. I went there for 3 years, and I actually quite enjoyed Evergreen. It's not the same place I went to today, let me tell you, but it was a very, very great place to be in the 80s. And one thing about the Evergreen State College is it was really all about seminaring. You would have to read a book, and you would go in. It was like I think the ratio was 15 students to a professor, and you would read a book or you'd read the material, and you would seminar. You'd get in a class, and you'd sit around a table, or a couple tables, big tables, for hours and talk about what you'd written, or what you'd read, or what you'd written. I'd seen a lot of people get into some knockdown, drag-out arguments, but they had to bring their civility with them because they had to learn how to, or they had to already know, but they had to do it articulately, state their case. And the whole point of seminaring was to have discussion. And that's something that was drilled into me. I've always loved to have discussion. I've always loved talking to people, even people that have beliefs that are diametrically opposed to mine. I think one of the great ways of learning anything, I once heard somebody say, you should never truly know anything. Because if you think you truly know something, that means you stop thinking about it and you're unwilling or reluctant to receive new input when new input comes around. And I sort of took that to heart. I always thought that, I think it's really important to have discourse. It's important to never close yourself off from ideas, no matter where they came from. I mean, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but Stanley Kubrick is my favorite film director, and I've heard that he would send his assistant around to all the department heads before a day's shooting and ask if the department heads had any ideas that they would wish to convey to Mr. Kubrick. And I thought that was, to me, that shows what the security of a great leader is. You're not afraid of ideas. You're not afraid of dissent, because one of the marks of, I think, a great human being is to understand dissent and be able to deal with it, discuss it, and use it. I've always thought that. Now, one of the things that has been distressing to me over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, really since the beginning of social media, is the decline of discourse. And I think the article that I was covering the other night about the lack of people reading is part of that. People are getting their information in sound bites. They're getting TikTok video information. They're going to places where they're receiving information that is in bite sizes and is not particularly well constructed or thought out, and they're incorporating those into their own beliefs without really having the background and information that they should. I think the rise of meme culture. Look, I love memes because I love the creativity of memes. But the thing is, the people that create memes, the original creators, are the clever ones. I'm guilty. I send out, I repost memes all the time that I think are witty and I think are funny. But for me, it's a quick, it's a fun thing to shoot out. It's stream of consciousness. But when you start getting, I personally have been on the receiving end of the Simpsons men shouting at cloud meme, old man shouts at clouds. And I'm like, first of all, everybody who sends me that meme, and I've probably received it 400 or 500 times, I swear to God. And I understand that everybody thinks who sends me that meme that they're being clever or witty, but first of all, it's an old meme. And I mean, and it's not clever. You were beaten to the punch hundreds of times before, but I understand everybody thinks they're the first time or whatever. I get that. I've been on the receiving end of an attempted cancellation unfairly, just because something I didn't realize. There were people that either thought a character that I was playing on purpose was indicative of me, or they did really think I was an old man shouting at clouds, which is fine. You don't have to have everybody like you, but it was interesting that this cancellation came from people that I was working with, and nobody bothered to call me to explain my position, and they actually took my post, and it was a video that I posted that had commentary with the video, and they only took my commentary out, which looked pretty inflammatory, which I admit, if it was taken out of context from the video. And maybe I wasn't doing a good job of conveying what I wanted to say, but it was interesting because this was with people I work with, and if you hate my guts, you hate my guts, but just tell me, don't try and ruin my life publicly when I've done nothing except try and work well with you. It was interesting. I don't like the way certain groups are trying to change things about our culture, especially language. Now, I'm a big reader. One of the things that I've realized, and I think one of the great failings of my own life, is I've never really learned or mastered a foreign language. I've studied two in my life. I studied Hebrew and I studied Spanish. And the problem with both of those languages were I was such a voracious reader that it was frustrating not to be able to instantly read in those languages. I was studying them. I had to learn how to read them. I wanted to learn how to speak them. But it's very difficult if you're not around native speakers of a language to learn it quickly. I wish that I learned. I would like to be multilingual. I would love to speak French. I would love to speak Japanese. I would love to speak Hebrew. I would love to speak German. I'd love to speak Italian. The Romance languages, certainly. My ex-wife was Ukrainian, so she spoke Russian. I wish that I had learned other languages. That was a failing in my own life, but only because it was frustrating. But I'd like to start this by talking about why language itself is important. And I warn you, this is going to get political, and you might not want to hear it, but I think it's important. So this is an article I found from Stanford University, the Stanford Report, and it was published August 22nd, 2019. The Power of Language, How Words Shape People and Culture. At Stanford, linguistics scholars seek to determine what is unique and universal about the language we use, how it is acquired, and the ways it changes over time. Speaking, writing, and reading are integral to everyday life, where language is the primary tool for expression and communication. Studying how people use language, what words and phrases they unconsciously choose and combine, can help us better understand ourselves and why we behave the way we do. Linguistics scholars seek to determine... Sorry, I was eating pistachios before I went on the air. Linguistics scholars seek to determine what is unique and universal about the language we use, how it is acquired, and the ways in which it changes over time. They consider language as a cultural, social, and psychological phenomenon. This makes me think about the 1982 Clint Eastwood movie Firefox, where he steals a MiG, a Russian MiG, and it runs on thoughts, and he keeps saying to himself, think Russian, think Russian, think Russian. I don't know why that makes me think about that, but it does. Understanding why and how languages differ tells us about the range of what is human, said Jan Jarafsky, the Jackson Eli Reynolds Professor in Humanities and Chair of the Department of Linguistics in the School of Humanities and Sciences at Stanford. Discovering what is universal about languages can help us understand the core of our humanity. The stories below represent some of the ways linguists have investigated many aspects of language, including its semantics and syntax, phonetics and phonology, and its social, psychological, and computational aspects. Stanford linguists and psychologists study how language is interpreted by people. Even the slightest differences in language use can correspond with biased beliefs of the speakers, according to research. One study showed that a relatively harmless sentence, such as, "Girls are as good at boys as math," can subtly perpetuate sexist stereotypes. Because of the statement's grammatical structure, it implies that being good at math is more common or natural for boys than girls, the researcher said. Language can play a big role in how we and others perceive the world, and linguists work to discover what words and phrases can influence us unknowingly. How other languages inform our own. People speak roughly 7,000 languages worldwide. Although there is a lot in common among languages, each one is unique, both in its structure and the way it reflects the culture of the people who speak it. Jarafsky said, "It's important to study languages other than our own and how they develop over time because it can help scholars understand what lies at the foundation of humans' unique way of communicating with one another. All of this research can help us discover what it means to be human," Jarafsky said. Now, one of the things that I personally have found interesting is there are some languages that are gendered. Spanish, for instance, is a gendered language. And in our interesting time where gender is, the idea of gender has sort of been changing, how does that affect a language that is gendered? Different words for male or different ways to say things for male and female. Well, how does that come into play? And how does that work? I don't like the fact that people are making up nonsense words to address the pronoun issue, for instance. As somebody who is an avid reader, I don't understand. I mean, the whole thing about pronouns seems odd to me. Why not create new words, create slang words, create something? But using pronouns in a certain way, I get why people do it. I just don't like the fact that I'm a polite person, so if somebody tells me how they want to be identified, I'll do that. But I don't like the fact that my interest in speaking clearly and speaking a language, I have to change those ways of being in myself to appease other people's use of bastardizing a language. That's something I don't like. And I'll do it, but I don't like it. And I don't like the fact that there's groups of people that are trying to foist language on others, because that's where, well, we're going to get to. We're going to get to that in this show. That's something we shouldn't allow. However, it's doesn't matter if somebody wants me to call them something, I'm happy to do it. But that's a choice. If I don't want to make the choice, or somebody else doesn't want to make the choice, they shouldn't have to, because language is important. And the fact that we understand each other, and that's not to say language hasn't changed over the centuries, because it certainly has. But it is very important for all of our communication. Every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. But if you can't understand the language they're using, you're not going to be able to hear what they mean. And that's problematic. Language as a lens into behavior. Linguists analyze how certain speech patterns correspond to particular behaviors, including how language can impact people's buying decisions or influence their social media use. For example, in one research paper, a group of Stanford researchers examined the differences in how Republicans and Democrats express themselves online to better understand how a polarization of beliefs can occur on social media. We live in a very polarized time, Jurafsky said. Understanding what different groups of people say and why is the first step in determining how we can bring people together. I agree. And so there you go. That's a little bit of language in Stanford University. Now, I want to talk about George Orwell. And for those of you people who read George Orwell and read books in high school or even junior high, you probably read his very famous book, Animal Farm. Or maybe his even more famous book, 1984. And 1984, as we all know, was 40 fucking years ago. And I think the actual 1984 was like 40 years after he wrote the book. So we're 80 years away from Orwellian times, or when George Orwell was writing. And he wrote a lot about politics. He wrote a lot of things. And for those of you who don't know who George Orwell is or was, well, I figured that's why I'm here. I'm here. I found a really interesting, of course, now I just lost it. I don't even know. I just had it and it disappeared because I'm using some crazy, let's bring it back. It completely disappeared. No, it's back. And I would like to share this with you. So for those of you who don't know who George Orwell was or why he was important, let's delve into it, shall we? And this was written by Gary Hassan, and he has a blog called Writing Research, Policy, and Ideas. And he wrote this article on June 1st, 2022. The relevance of George Orwell today, standing up for democracy and against fascism. This was in the Scottish Review, June 1st, 2022. George Orwell's influence as a writer has grown since his death in 1950 at the age of 46, particularly in recent decades. He was unashamedly a voice on the left, independent-minded, an iconoclast, and unafraid to stand against the hypocrisies and tyrannies of both his own side as well as of the right. He's kind of a hero of mine. In today's challenging world, from climate change to the war in Ukraine and the rise of despotism, demagoguery, and nascent fascism from Russia to the U.S., not to forget our own domestic and Boris Johnson's degenerate Toryism, Orwell provides a powerful example of a moral compass and the importance of principle. Last Saturday, I had the rare privilege and opportunity to have a 2-hour public conversation with Orwell's adopted son, Richard Blair, in Garrenthal Multicultural Centre in Glasgow. Blair had a difficult childhood. He was born in May 1944 and adopted by Orwell and his wife Eileen as a baby. Eileen subsequently died in March of 1945. Orwell married again in October of 1949 to Sonia and then died 3 months later in January 1950, leaving Blair to be brought up by Orwell's sister Avril. After school in Scotland and England, Richard went on to have a career in industry before, upon retirement, setting up the Orwell Society as well as being a patron of the Orwell Foundation and the prestigious Orwell Prize. Richard Blair remembers his father well, even though he was taken from him when he was 5.5 years. He recalls a man with many qualities and contradictions who loved telling me stories with a clarity of thought, knowing that simple words can convey a deep meaning. Orwell had a vivid sense of humor and a deep love of the outdoors, animals, and gardening. Central to this and Blair's memories of Barnhar Farm on the island of Jura, owned then as it is now by the Fletcher family, where he and his father spent much of the summertime from 1946 onward. Blair reminisced about spending time there with his father, saying it was a wonderful place for children. You could open your front door and you are free. He recounted memories such as when their car broke down on the way from Jura to Glasgow, or the time their dinghy sank whilst they were navigating a Corvaecian whirlpool and they had to take refuge on a nearby island. This became a story at the time in the Scottish Daily Express, with Blair adding, just in case anyone didn't think it was true. Blair described Orwell's journey as a writer, struggling at first to make a living in the 1930s, and his identification with the marginalized and exploited that he set out in such accounts as Down and Out in Paris and London and The Road to Wigan Pier. Another formative experience for Orwell was joining the Indian colonial police in Burma, which made him an enforcer for British imperial rule. Burma turned Orwell into an anti-imperialist, seeing at first the brutality, inhumanity, and pettiness of the British Empire, which formed the background to be his first novel, Burmese Days, in 1934. In Blair's words, he began to realize what imperialism is all about and how the Burmese were oppressed by the British. This was a political awakening for Orwell and influenced his anti-authoritarianism, opposition to power and dominance, and belief in libertarianism, all of which were to inform his brand of democratic socialism. Blair took us on a travelogue of Orwell's commitment to fight in the Spanish Civil War, showing his solidarity with the democratically elected Republican government against Franco's fascist insurrection, supported by Hitler and Mussolini. He risked his life being shot and injured by a sniper while witnessing the division and infighting on the Republican side, which was aided by Stalinist Russia and the communists on the ground who sought to eliminate sections of the left, such as the Trotskyites. Orwell wrote about this in Homage to Catalonia, the need to stand for democracy against fascism and its want to overthrow democracy, while acknowledging the brutality of the Soviet communism and the authoritarian anti-democratic practices of the official communist tradition, which took its orders from Moscow. Some on the left would have preferred less searing honesty, while others, even with Spain and the Stalinist show trials of the 1930s, were fellow travelers and refused to engage in any criticism of the Soviets. Orwell saw the fight against fascism gather in the 1930s, a cause which the British establishment and mainstream political sentiment tried to avoid confronting through UK government policy of non-intervention in the war and the appeasement of Hitler and Mussolini. Yeah, that worked out well. But he also saw the need to stand in opposition to Soviet communism, a perspective which only grew as the Second World War began and then engulfed millions. In 1944, Orwell wrote his classic tale Animal Farm, published in 1945, a fable about revolution and egalitarianism gone wrong, which is based on post-1917 Russia. Such was pro-Russian sentiment in Britain that several publishers turned it down before it eventually saw the light the year the war ended. Blair said of Animal Farm that a lot of it came from Eileen. It is such a different book from anything else he had written. There's something unique about it. In its audacious imagination, it is a book to entrance children and adults with a story that has deep political resonance of the revolution betrayed. Animal Farm was an immediate commercial success and gave Orwell the money and freedom to plan 1984, a novel inspired by his revulsion of the omnipotent authority and power and belief in individualism and dissent. It was inspired by Eileen, who had previously written a poem entitled End of the Century. 1984, which came out in 1934, so I guess, what was that, 90 years ago, and there are common themes with her husband's later work. The march of authoritarianism and the threat of all-pervasive technology. Blair believes that the title of 1984 was not, as many contend, an inversion of 1948, but in memory of my mother. Orwell's dislike of bureaucracy and systems had been strengthened by his experience in the war, working in the BBC for 2 years, comparing the corporation, according to Blair, as a cross between a girls' school and a lunatic asylum. He drew from this and created such terms as news speak, the Ministry of Truth, and Room 101, which have entered everyday language and contributed to the term Orwellian. 1984 was written in Barnhill, on Jura, where Orwell originally went to be with his son to get rid of all the problems of London. Now he could sit down and concentrate. But Orwell went and undermined his search for solitude by inviting all of his London friends to come and stay in Jura, something that Richard, as an only child who had recently lost his mother, appreciated. Blair conveys a very human side to his father of his life in writing and of being a loving parent, and perhaps because of this does not want to labor on the political side. He said at one point, start taking sides and you end up in trouble, which I suggested might have been the motive for much of Orwell's political writing. Blair, however, stated firmly that the one key message from his father concerning those in public life was, don't believe the lies people in power tell you, and that if they tell them often enough, they become the truth. This is an important note today, as it was in his father's time. Orwell's writing conveys angst, anxiety, and insecurity about the English class system. There is the fear of what Blair calls the upper-lower middle classes, always conscious that they do not have a secure foothold in the comfortably off middle classes, often racked by financial worries, and the even bigger fear that they may drop into the even more insecure sections of the working class. Such characteristics are evident in his fiction. There is the deep frustration at the hierarchical class system, hierarchical, I can't even say that word, its cultural expressions and social mores, and how it suffocates and represses the potential of human beings. This can be seen in Keep the Aspidistra Flying, centered on a struggling writer, a clergyman's daughter, a woman trapped by poverty and convention, and coming up for air, with its tension between the oppressions of capitalism and the coming war. Orwell and the big issues of today. Orwell understood that the left has to stand unapologetically for its principles, comprehend the nature of power and authoritarianism, whether from right or left, and the shadow of imperialism in the British Empire. It is impossible to elicit what Orwell would have made of present-day Britain and the world, but he would have had no doubt been shocked by the shallow nature of politics and political discourse. He would have seen Boris Johnson's Toryism, a grotesque, irresponsible entitlement culture, as the worst of that tradition. He would have noticed Labour's timidity, scared of alienating polite society and wary of being seen as unpatriotic, and thought that for all the change in the world, some things remain constant. And he would have recognized the self-serving nature of the British state as similar to the one he witnessed in the 1930s. But he would also have noted that politics is about recognizing the big calls and refusing to be diverted. Climate change, inequality, and the widespread prevalence of poverty in a land of plenty such as Britain, and the inhumanity of the British class system, with some people thinking they have the unchallengeable right to shape and decide the lives of others. What Orwell would have also recognized and been mobilized to act upon would be the rise of fascism, recognizing that there can be no accommodation with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, an attack on democracy which invites comparison with the Spanish Civil War. He would have had no truck with what the Kiev-based historian Taras Bilius calls the anti-imperialism of idiots found in sections of today's left, which, because it opposes Western imperialism, ends up in the same sewer of being apologists for Putin's imperialism. Orwell is always there to remind us that we must have a moral conscience in difficult times. Otherwise, we are quite literally lost and have to stand against tyranny and hypocrisy wherever it comes from. So there you go. There's a little primer about George Orwell with insights from his son and this article I found on a Scottish blog. Now, why do I think all of that is important? And what does this have to do with what I think? Well, everybody's asking me who and what I'm going to vote for. And I will say this. There are favorite presidents of mine when I was growing up. I was a fan of Lincoln as a kid growing up, and I was a fan of George Washington growing up. They always fascinated me as historical figures. And for instance, I've told the story when Spielberg's Lincoln came out, I thought it was going to be this kind of stodgy, I mean, I shouldn't have doubted, but I bought the Blu-ray, and it was one of those things where I kept buying other Blu-rays, and it would go to the bottom of the stack, bottom of the stack, bottom of the stack, bottom of the stack. And when I finally got around one late night, I think I put it on like at 2 a.m. or something, and I was blown away. And I watched Lincoln 5 nights in a row just because I was so fascinated by the man. And no, not because Lincoln was in a 3rd season Star Trek episode. The Savage Curtain is not great. But anyway, it's interesting, but not great. And let's face it, it's goofy. I'm a huge John F. Kennedy fan, and not just because he got us into space. And I understand all the things and all the contentious, everything that surrounds these men now that people want to point to and cancel them or talk about. Look, they are a product of their time. And we, of course, practicing presentism, and we're looking back and judging people that lived 100 years ago or 200 years ago based on what's going on today is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of in my life. All of human history is just one big charnel house of horrors. So to sit there and to look back at somebody and pick out one because they were men of the day, and to say that person did this or that person owned slaves or that person that fought in this thing and that, and hold that against them in a world where that was normal, is ridiculous. And people who do that drive me absolutely fucking crazy, just so you know. But anyway, there was an article that dropped in the Atlantic today about language and Orwell, and I thought it interesting to share. Now, before people say that this is going to be partisan one way or another, keep in mind, I haven't said who I'm voting for, and I really don't think that's anyone's business who I'm voting for. But all I can say to you is, and I've said this before on the show, I think it's important to vote your conscience and vote your heart. But the most important thing is to be an educated voter and understand why you are voting for the people. And by the way, you should be voting locally in your state elections and in the presidential election. I implore everybody, get your voter guide. California has a great voter guide. Read through it, check out the issues, and understand voting locally, that's going to directly affect your town, where you're living, the state you're in. This is as important as voting for the President of the United States, maybe more so because it'll have more direct impact on you. There's a particular, there's something going on in California where basically they want to stop retail theft. They basically decriminalize shoplifting, which was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Why you would do that to basically allow people to walk into businesses and steal things? It has ruined so many retailers. It's gotten rid of some of our tax base. It's gotten rid of employment for young people. It's the dumbest thing in the world. No one should be allowed to shoplift. No one should get free shit. We are not a communist country, and so it's ridiculous that companies are expected to absorb that. There's a lot of big money behind making sure that doesn't happen anymore. And I tend to agree with them in this particular instance. But anyway, get out and vote. It's an important vote on all levels of the election. I don't think who I vote for is really particularly important. I think anybody can guess after watching my show for almost 1,000 episodes. You could probably guess, although you might be surprised because the last couple of years have really taught me something about the side of the aisle that I thought I used to be on. And that's changed quite a bit. But anyway, I'm going to read this article, and I'm just warning everybody, don't get triggered by it. Just listen to it. Just listen to it. Listen to the language of it, and listen to what it is saying. And here's the article. What Orwell didn't anticipate. And this dropped today. It's by Megan Garber, and it dropped in the Atlantic. 1984 ends not with a bang, but with a grammar lesson. Readers of George Orwell's novel, still reeling likely from the brutal dystopia they've spent the previous 300-odd pages living in, are subjected to a lengthy explanation of newspeak. Newspeak, the novel's uncanny form of English. The appendix explains the language that has been created to curtail independent thought, the culled vocabulary, the sterilized syntax. The regime's hope that before long, all the vestiges of old speak, English in its familiar form, the English of Shakespeare and Milton and many of Orwell's readers, will be translated into the new vernacular. The old language and all it carried with it will die away. With its dizzying details and technical prose, the principles of newspeak makes for a supremely strange ending. It is, in today's parlance, a choice, but a fitting one. Language, in 1984, is violence by another means, an adjunct of the totalitarian strategies inflicted by the regime. Orwell's most famous novel in that sense is the fictionalized version of his most famous essay, Politics and the English language. Published in 1946, it is a writing manual primarily, a guide to making language that says what it means and means what it says. It is also an argument. Clear language, Orwell suggests, is a semantic necessity as well as a moral one. Newspeak in 1984 destroys with the same ferocious efficiency that tanks and bombs do. It is born of the essay's most elemental insight. If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. The essay over the years has enjoyed the same backhandled success that Orwell himself has. Its barbs have softened into conventional wisdom. Its enduring relevance has consigned it in some degree to cliché. Who would argue against clarity? But the essay today can be read less as a rousing defense of the English language than as a prescient concession of defeat. Use clear language cannot be our guide when clarity itself can be so elusive. Our words have not been honed into oblivion. On the contrary, new ones spring to life with giddy regularity. But they fail all too often in the same ways that news speak does. They limit political possibilities rather than expand them. They cede to cynicism. They saturate us in uncertainty. The words might mean what they say, and they might not. They might describe shared truths. They might manipulate them. Language, the connective tissue of the body politic, that space where the collective we matters so much, is losing its ability to fulfill its most basic duty, to communicate, to correlate, to connect us to the world and to one another. And semantic problems, as Orwell knew, have a way of turning into real ones. Violence descends. Threats take shape. Emergencies come. We may try to warn one another. We may scream the warnings, but we have trouble conveying the danger. We have so much to say. In another way, though, we have no words. Earlier this month, Donald Trump mused aloud about the violence Americans might anticipate on November 5th. If Election Day brings havoc, he told Fox News' Maria Bartiromo, the crisis would come not from outside actors, but instead from the enemy from within. Some very bad people, he clarified, some sick people, some radical left lunatics. The former president further mused about a solution to the problem. I think it should be very easily handled, if necessary, by the National Guard, he said, or if really necessary, by the military. A presidential candidate who may well retake the White House is threatening to use the military against American citizens. The news here is straightforward. The language that makes the news, though, is not. The words twist and tease, issuing their threats in the conditioned tense. It should be, if necessary. Trump's words often do this. They imply very much while saying very little. They are schooled, like the man himself, in the dark art of plausible deniability. In them, Orwell's doublespeak, that jargon of purposeful obscurity, gets one more layer of insulating irony. The former president says whatever he wants, and he reserves the right not to mean it. Do we take him at his word? The answer to this question, on which so much else depends, can only ever be, well, maybe. When he describes the enemy from within, or when he muses about police forces fighting back against criminals for one real tough, nasty day, or when he announces his intention to spend the first day of his second term acting as a dictator, you could read each as a direct threat. You could assume that he's lying, embellishing, teasing, trolling. You could say that the line, like Trump's others, should be taken seriously, but not literally. You could try your best, knowing all that is at stake, to parse the grammar of his delusion. But the fact that you need to translate him at all is already a concession. The constant uncertainty about the gravest of manners is one of the ways that Trump keeps people in his thrall. Clear language is a basic form of kindness. It considers the other person. It wants to be understood. Trump's argot, though, or argot, is self-centered. It treats shared reality as an endless negotiation. The words cannot bear the weight of all of this irony. Democracy is, at its core, a task of information management. To do its work, people need to be able to trust that the information they're processing is, in the most fundamental ways, accurate. Trump's illegibility makes everything else less legible, too. Orwell published Politics at the end of a conflict that had, in its widespread use of propaganda, also been a war of words. In the essay, he wrestles with the fact that language, as a bomb with near limitless blast radius, could double as a weapon of mass destruction. This is why clarity matters. This is why words are ethical tools as well as semantic ones. The defense of language that Orwell offered in Politics was derived from his love of hard facts. So long as I remain alive, and well, I shall continue to feel strongly about prose style, to love the surface of the earth, and take a pleasure in solid objects and scraps of useless information, he confessed in his 1946 essay, Why I Write. His was an elegant dogma. Words matter because facts matter, because truth matters. Freedom in 1984 is many things, but they all spring from the same source: the ability to say that 2 + 2 = 4. One October surprise of 2024 took an aptly Orwellian turn. The scandal this time around was a matter of language. Earlier this month, John Kelly, Trump's former White House chief of staff, escalated his warnings that his former boss is unfit for office. Kelly told The Atlantic that Trump had expressed a desire for generals like the ones, quote, Hitler had. Then, in an interview published by the New York Times, Kelly described Trump's dictatorial approach to leadership, his drive to suppress opposition, his insatiable appetite for power. He concluded that Trump fits the definition of fascist. Kelly's claim was echoed more mildly by Trump's former Secretary of Defense. He certainly has those inclinations, Mark Esper said, and less mildly by Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Trump is the most dangerous person to this country, Miley warned in Bob Woodward's latest book, its publication timed to coincide with the election. He is also, Miley added, fascist to the core. Trump denied the man's claims. I'm the opposite of a Nazi, he said. Late last week, 13 others who had served in high-level positions in the Trump administration signed an open letter. Everyone, they wrote, should heed General Kelly's warning. The comments made headlines because of the people who expressed them. Each had worked directly with Trump. The former officials made history, though, because of the word they deployed in their warnings. Fascist is a claim of last resort. It is a term of emergency. Because of that, its validity as a description for Trump's seething strain of populism has been the subject of a long-standing debate among scholars, journalists, and members of the public. One made even more complicated by the fact that, as the historian Ian Kershaw has observed, trying to define fascism is like trying to nail jelly to the wall. But one need not be a scholar of fascism to see the plain reality. Trump lost an election. He refused to accept the result. In a second term, he has suggested he will terminate the Constitution, use the American judicial system to take revenge on those who have angered him, and perform sweeping immigration raids, expelling millions of people from the country. Trump, in addition to praising Hitler's generals, regularly uses language that echoes Hitler's hatreds. He has described immigrants, whatever their legal status, as a formless invasion, and the press as the enemy of the people. He has dismissed those who are insufficiently loyal to him as human scum and vermin. Fascism, that call to history, that careful description, that 5-alarm piece of language, is the right word, but it may turn out, at the same time, to be the wrong one. It might, in our cynical movement, provoke exhaustion rather than alarm. In Politics, Orwell reserves particular vitriol for political language that hides its intentions in euphemism and wan metaphor. Wording that resorts to ambiguity can disguise atrocities, as when, in one of the examples Orwell offers, the bombing of villages and defenseless people is referred to merely as pacification. Orwell's problem was that language gives writers permission not to think. Ours, however, is language that gives readers permission not to care. Even the clearest, most precise language can come to read in our restless age as cliché. The first man who compared woman to a rose was a poet, the old line goes. The second, an imbecile. On the internet, anyone can become that imbecile. For language in general, this is not the issue. When on fleek goes off in an instant, or cruji plummets from coinage to cringe, more words will arrive in their place. When the restlessness comes for political language, though, for the words we rely on to do the shared work of self-government, the impatience itself becomes Orwellian. Urgent words can feel tired. Crisis can come, but no words suffice to rouse us. Americans face an election that our democracy, hard-fought, hard-won, ever fragile, may not survive. Defend democracy, though, can read less as a call to arms than as a call to yawn. Trump himself is insulated by all the ennui. Nearly every word you might apply to him fits the picture that was already there. His depravity has become tautological. It's just Trump being Trump. It's shocking, not surprising. The word fascism can fail that way too, and it can be further defanged by the bigger cliche of all: thoughtlessly partisan politics. Some audiences, seeing the word deployed as a description, will dismiss it as simply more evidence of the media's or John Kelly's alleged bias against Trump. Others, assuming that fascism and Nazism are the same thing, assuming that fascism cannot be present until troops are goose-stepping in the streets, will see the term as evidence of hysteria. But fascism can come whether the language acknowledges it or not. It marches towards us, restricted right by the restricted right, book ban by book ban. It can happen here. The question is whether we'll be able to talk about it or whether people will care. An ABC News poll, Ipsos poll, released last week asked registered voters across the country whether Trump was a fascist, defined as a political extremist who seeks to act as a dictator, disregards individual rights, and threatens or uses force against their opponents. Nearly half the respondents, 49%, said he was. Roughly the same percentage of people who, in a recent national poll, said that they plan to vote for him. The philosopher Emilio Arango observed, in Mexican political life of the mid-20th century, a gnawing sense of uncertainty, a mode of being, he wrote, that incessantly oscillates between two possibilities, between two effects, without knowing which one of those to depend on. The unsteadiness, he suggested, amounts to pain. In it, the soul suffers. It feels torn and wounded. Uranga gave this condition a name: zozobra. The wound, he describes, the plague of doubleness, has settled into American political language. In her 2023 book, Doppelganger, Naomi Klein describes the mirror world in right-wing politics, a place where every reality has a rhetorical double. She focuses on the rhetoric of Steve Bannon, the former Trump administration strategist. As Democrats and journalists discussed the big lie, Donald Trump's claim that he won the 2020 presidential election, Bannon began discussing the big steal, the idea that Joe Biden, against all evidence, stole the presidency. The tactic is common. Trump regularly fantasizes before his cheering crowds about the violence that might befall his opponents. Journalists describe him as engaging in extreme and inflammatory rhetoric. Republicans in Trump's camp soon enough began accusing Democrats of, as one of his surrogates put it, irresponsible rhetoric that is causing people to get hurt. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham's response to the former military leader's warnings about Trump took a similar tack. Their rhetoric is dangerous, he said this weekend. On Monday, Trump gave John Kelly's comments about him a predictably zozobric twist. Kamala Harris, he said, is a fascist. In the mirror world, Klein writes, there is a copycat story and an answer for everything, often with very key similar words. The attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021 has commonly been described as an insurrection. Republican power brokers have begun describing peaceful political protests as insurrections. We must save American democracy. The stark slogan that gained new currency in response to the big lie is now a common refrain on the right. Elon Musk, at a recent Trump rally, argued that the former president must win to preserve democracy in America. Mirroring as propaganda is extremely effective. It addles the mind. It applies a choose-your-own-adventure approach to meaning itself. Mirroring does, in that way, precisely what Orwell feared. It gives up on the very possibility of common language. It robs political terms of their ability to clarify, to unite, to warn. In a world that is endlessly doubling itself, 2 + 2 = 4 may be a liberating truth, or it may be a narrative imposed on you by a smug and elitist regime. Freedom, soon enough, becomes the ability to say that the sum of 2 + 2 is whatever you want it to be. The words fly flagrant and fast, the definitions that might ground them trail meekly in their wake. But when the words are mere slogans, shibboleths and signifiers, narrowcast to one's tribe, dictionary definitions miss the point. Slogans are rhetoric. They're advertising. They're vibes. They can function in that way as what the author Robert J. Lifton called thought-terminating cliches. Words or phrases that effectively curtail debate, and with it, critical thought itself. Last year, an author who wrote a book decrying the woke indoctrination of children struggled to define what woke actually means. In 2022, the New York Times editorial board effectively declared lexicographic defeat. However you define cancel culture, it wrote, Americans know it exists and feel its burden. On Tuesday, Elon Musk, who has been spreading his Trump-friendly brand of groupthink on his social media platform X, shared an image. A man, his face obscured, wearing a green cap. Stitched onto the hat, in large all-caps letters, was, "Make Orwell fiction again." In 1990, a conservative Republican group headed by Newt Gingrich sent a pamphlet to Republican candidates running in state elections across the country. The document amounted to a dictionary, 133 words that operatives might use to elevate themselves, family, freedom, pride, and vilify their competitors, decay, corruption, pathetic, traitors. The pamphlet was titled, unironically, Language, a Key Mechanism of Control. Many in the media, nodding to the Orwell of it all, came to know it as Newt speak. The 1990s were years when politicians were translating the insights of postmodern discourse, the power of framing and the like, into the everyday practice of politics. But Gingrich's memo turned spin into a plot twist. Every word of its grim new language represented an argument, that Democrats were not merely opponents, but enemies, that the differences between the two sides were not merely political, but moral. It recast American politics not as an ongoing debate amongst equals, but as an epic battle between good and evil. The core aim of propaganda, Aldous Huxley observed, is to make one group of people forget that another group of people is human. The pamphlet, cheerfully promising aspiring politicians they could learn to speak like Newt, wove that logic word by word into American political habits. The language in the pamphlet is stark. It is evocative. It is so very, very clear. It also takes the advice Orwell gave to preserve the thing he most loved and puts it in the service of the thing he most feared. Orwell watched the rise of communism. He fought the rise of fascism. He observed from a distance and at times from intimately close range the blunt force power of words. He saw how quickly a common language could be transformed into a divisive one, and how readily in the tumult new hatreds and fears could settle into the syntax of everyday life. And he knew that history, so rarely consigned to the past, would repeat, that the battles of the 20th century would very likely be refought in some form in the future. He knew all that, but he could not know it all. And there are moments in politics and the English language that can read today as nearly naive, with its faith in facts and its hope that clarity could be our salvation. Orwell was a satirist too. 1984, he believed, was an example of the genre, but he did not account for the ways that irony could come for language itself. He did not imagine propaganda that does its work through winks and shrugs rather than shouts. He did not sense how possible it would become for people in the future, seeking his wisdom, to wonder whether we use clear language offers any counsel at all. This is not Orwell's failing necessarily, and it need not be our own. If we look to him for refuge and find none, that means simply that we will have to use the words, we have to create new advice, new axioms, new ways forward. We can take the insight that drove him, that words can expand the world or limit it, that they can connect us to one another or cleave us, and seek new means of clarity. We can treat language not just as a tool, but as a duty. We can keep remembering and reminding one another that 2 + 2 equals fucking 4. I added the fucking in that, just so you know. So, I thought I would throw that out there. That's my big political statement before the election. That words matter. That our language must be clear and concise, and it's important to use words that we can all understand. So when we speak to one another, we can understand one another. And I do think that is the most important thing that we can do for our culture, because every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And when they tell you their story, you need to be able to understand it and understand what they're saying. It's important. Anyway, let's see what you guys have to say, if anything. This is kind of an odd, I haven't really gone into this, but there you go. Darth Plato says, rest in peace, Terry Garr. Yes, she was wonderful. I mean, you know, she was dancing on shows in the 60s, and of course, I loved her when I first saw her in Star Trek, and of course, Young Frankenstein and Tootsie and Close Encounters and everything she did. She was so good. Brandon says, my brother sent a request to come talk on the Robservations 1000 show, and he's been watching for years, and I hope he gets to come chat on the big day. Well, Brandon, I'm sure he probably will, because I'm not going to say no to anybody, unless, you know, you turn out to be a monumental douchebag. I don't know. But your brother, I'm sure, is not. Kenneth Colton says, happy Halloween, Rob. Spider caught a fly. Bring out the gimp. I like the gimp. Darth Plato says, Charles V. I speak Spanish to God, French to men, Italian to women, and German to my horse. That's a great quote. Scott Bartholomew says, target date for episode 1000. Well, here's the thing. So, I finished mixing episode 1 of True Noir. Episode 1 is basically completed, maybe a few tweaks, but for the most part completed. Episode 2 will be completed. I still have a lot of work. I have 8 more episodes to cut. So the reason I've been spacing out Robservations episodes and hadn't been doing very many is because I've been working feverishly on True Noir. So I don't know if I'm going to make it. It's probably going to be the week after the first week in November, sometime, but I don't know when. I'll know more because this is episode 995, so there's 96, 97, 98, 99. It's 5 more episodes. So maybe I don't know. I don't know. We shall see. We shall see. But sometime in the next 2 weeks for sure. Stephen Langford says, of all the shills that you know on YouTube, you are my favorite. Just kidding. I know you're not a shill. I just wanted to tell you happy Halloween and happy birthday. Your thoughts on Cavill possibly being the next James Bond? I say, fuck yeah, Rob. I wouldn't mind that. He's certainly got the physicality for it. He could look like Bond. I really liked him in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I think he could absolutely play Bond. It really, to me, what the James Bond franchise really needs now is a direction forward. I liked Daniel Craig as Bond, but I only like one of the James Bond movies he made. I loved one, which is Casino. I'm a Quantum of Solace apologist, which has many problems because of the strike it was made under. But then the other 4 movies, or the other 3 Bond films, Skyfall, Spectre, and especially No Time to Die, were all different kinds of... Look, I know everyone loves Skyfall. Skyfall is just a Dark Knight riff, and James Bond never got a mission to go on. He was on a mission at the beginning of Skyfall that he apparently walked off of because Moneypenny shot him off a train, which is so weird. And then he failed. He failed to keep M alive. And then Spectre, and it's just all... Bond needs to go on a mission. They need to figure out what the Bond franchise is. And people are like, well, he should go back to the 60s. Why would you want James Bond to go back to the 60s when he began in the 60s? Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, and On Her Majesty's On Her Majesty's Secret Service were all Bond movies set in the 60s. Why go back and make a period Bond movie? You're never going to get it right. It wouldn't really be a 60s Bond movie. It's not going to be a Cold War thriller. Look, I would love to see the Bond franchise come back. I would love it. But maybe it shouldn't. To be honest, the world has changed. The world is very asymmetric, and James Bond is not asymmetric. James Bond, I don't know how, some characters don't have to keep going. Some characters, their time is up, and that's okay. And I think that the Bond franchise, the last 3 Bond movies have shown Bond has a real problem. I'm surprised you could come up with, if you want to lean into the fantasy of it all, but I don't think they know how to do that anymore. I'd love to see a Carl Stromberg or a Hugo Drax. Yeah, or Spectre's volcanic base. I'd love to see any of that, but is that possible now? Can anybody pull that one off? I don't know. And would anybody buy into that? When you're watching, the funny thing is, we've got the Mission Impossible franchise. We've got Mission Impossible 8, Dead Reckoning 2, or whatever the hell they're going to call it. The funny thing about the Mission Impossible franchise is, other than the second one, which deserves a re-examination, it's like the sexless version of Bond. I'm tired of my action heroes, these action movies, being sexless. If you're one step away from dying, the great thing about James Bond is he knows he could lose his life at any time. That's why the man is a total sensualist. I'm going to drink my favorite drinks. I'm going to put my mouth on my favorite ladies unapologetically, because tomorrow I might not be here. So he's going to drink life in. I want to see a character like that. I don't want to see some sad sack James Bond going around like we saw James Bond kick ass in Casino Royale, where he wasn't Bond yet. He became 007 at the beginning. So he was a newly minted Bond agent. Bond was a newly minted 00. And then he was an old 00 by the time you get to Skyfall. And Quantum of Solace takes place the same fucking day as the end of... So you're watching this, and he never got to be Bond to go on regular missions. We never saw James Bond go on a regular mission. We saw the end of a mission at the end of Skyfall, but we never saw him go on that mission. So, anyway, Alvaro Zeno says, I don't have your book within arm's reach today, Alvaro, but Alvaro says, one reason to treat language seriously. Uttering a word is like striking a note on the keyboard of the imagination. Ludwig Wittgenstein said that. That's what a great quote. What a great quote. Scott Bartholomew says, thoughts on both versions of Payback. I liked them. I think I like the director's cut better, but I like them. Look, I'm a Mel Gibson fan. I'm a Mel Gibson fan. So yeah, they're both good. The Dead Man asks, he says, On Her Majesty's Secret Service has one of the best soundtracks. Well, it certainly does because of also the period. But you know what's interesting? I have a theory about this. The last John Barry Bond score was Living Daylights. And Living Daylights made a lot of use of drum machines and synths. And On Her Majesty's Secret Service made Barry used a lot of instrumentation of the time as well. And it's funny because I do think the Living Daylights soundtrack is pretty kick-ass too. I mean, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is probably my favorite Bond score, mostly because I grew up skiing, and when Walkman came out, I would constantly ski to James Bond music.
It also had, we have all the time in the world, time enough for love to unfold.
Come on. How can you go wrong with Louis Armstrong?
You cannot. All the things love has in store. Every step of the way.
Anyway, I love that song. I love that movie. And do you know where Christmas trees are grown? I don't know. Love that film. It's great, great, great. 1001 Johnny says, understanding the language of other people, to learn how they speak, to understand what they mean. This is what real empathy leads to. It takes effort, but it is rewarding because you will see humanity for what we are rather than what we want to be. Ooh, I love that. That's a great quote. Sheriff Carl, by the way, I got your request to be on the Robservations 1000th episode, says, I'm completely with you on where culture has gone since the social media takeover. I wish more people got out in the world a bit more. Every single person alive deserves to be here the same as everybody else. I love humanity. I love people, but humanity can be a real drag. You got that right. By the way, Jer Manninen from Finland said, great to catch you live. The Dan and ReZero are so good. I missed that. You sent that in. And also Blue Sunrise said Kathleen Kennedy has to go eventually. And that was from yesterday. So I apologize that I didn't get to those yesterday. Some old guy in Hawaii says, your Louis Armstrong also sounds like Yoda.
Really?
That's funny. Can't do it. Alvaro says, presentism is like film colorization, which 80s Siskel and Ebert called Hollywood's new vandalism. Likewise, we should resist it as a context erasure. Look, I totally agree. It's so bizarre to me that when I was growing up, there was no prejudice against the past, especially in pop culture. Like, no one's like, I'm not going to watch that because it's in black and white. I mean, a lot of my favorite shit was in black and white, even when I was a little kid. The Twilight Zone, Star Trek was obviously my favorite. But the Twilight Zone was also my favorite, along with Outer Limits to a lesser extent, because sometimes I didn't understand. And the Outer Limits episodes were longer, except for the 4th season of Twilight Zone. The thing about the Twilight Zone was there was no option. They were in black and white. And I love the Twilight Zone. Why would I not watch the Twilight Zone? It didn't matter to me that they were black and white, just like it didn't matter to me that Universal Monster movies were in black and white. It didn't matter to me that Mario Bava's Black Sunday was in black and white. I would watch them because they just were in black and white. I didn't sit there and go, well, I'm not going to watch these because they're in black and white. They're old. Well, everything that existed before I was born didn't mean I wasn't going to watch it. It's like, I'm going to go back. I'm not going to miss out on watching Day the Year Stood Still because it was in black and white. I'm not going to miss out watching Metropolis because it was silent. It's weird that we live in this time now where people don't want to, especially youth. I mean, it was like I remember discovering my first Doors record, the first Doors album, which has the end on it. And I remember listening to Mind Blown. I got it because I saw Apocalypse Now. And I'm like, I got to go get the Doors. I saw Apocalypse Now before I started listening to the Doors. But when I saw Apocalypse Now, I had to go get the Doors. And I got that first album. And it was like, I had no connection. Jim Morrison died 3 years after I was born, and I did not grow up. My parents were not playing the Doors at home, and I wasn't going to be like, I'm not going to go listen to that. I'm not going to go listen the Beatles. I'm not going to go listen to early Rolling Stones or the Who or whatever. I'll listen to the Yardbirds. It's bizarre to me that, and you had to listen to these things because so much of this music was used in other things, in movies and television, and you hear things cited. You had to know, like, Bob Dylan wasn't just a musician. He was a figure of the counterculture. You had to understand him and have a working knowledge of him. So, okay, nowadays, it's shocking to me how our youth is not interested in much that came before now. I don't get it. I don't understand. Because it's like contextually, like I don't understand people. Look, even if you're not religious, I was talking about this the other night. If you're not religious, you should still have a working knowledge of the Bible. I mean, even though I was raised Jewish, I would love to make a modern version of Job, to tell the story of Job in some kind of a modern context. I love that story. I would love to make a story about a man of faith. Now, I love stories about religion. I'm not a religious person, but I still love stories about religion. I love stories about gods. I love stories about devout Christians. I love stories that I don't like necessarily faith-based movies because they're not very good. They're getting better, but I like movies about religion. Give me The Rapture with Mimi Rogers. Amen. Am I not going to watch that? Hell no, I'm going to watch that. David Duchovny's in that too. Again, I don't understand. By the way, if you haven't seen The Rapture, come on, what's wrong with you? No, but it's hard to get now, I think. Is it streaming? Is The Rapture streaming? Anyway, I don't know. But I wanted to do this stream, and I wanted to talk a little politics, but couch it in the idea of language and what we are saying and what matters, because I think it's important. I really do. And presentism, it's not good, man, to like look back. It's so weird to me when people judge, well, that person should be canceled. 200 years ago, they did something that we don't like now. Like, what? Why? The world was totally different then. There was cocaine and Coca-Cola 120 years ago. I mean, how I would like to have lived then. Scott Bartholomew. Oh, wait. Alvaro sent in something else. He says, by the way, I highly recommend Christopher Hitchens' Why Orwell Matters. Also, sign me up for episode 1000. Oh, you're in. Happy to discuss a topic or do an interview conversation. Yeah, why don't we do an interview? I'll do an interview with you that I could pre-record and play. Basically, I've got authors, all my favorite authors. Get people to read books. And you have a new book out. So that would be fun. Scott Bartholomew says, looking forward to Scorsese's The Saints. I'm looking forward to that too. I'm looking forward to anything Scorsese makes. Sheriff Carl says, first time I heard the Doors' first album was my first time getting stoned. I was 10, and my older brother and his friends got me wasted and played my parents' records of it. Life-changing. Also, don't you think film grain is the new black and white for many? Oh, man. I can't even. Watching people opine about their physical media drives me insane. Film grain. It's I grew up on Pixar movies, so now film grain is anathema to me. I can't. It drives me crazy. That's another weird thing. Like, to understand film at all, to be a film fan, and to not delve into film history. No, man, I only watch things shot digitally. It's so weird. It's so weird. I don't get it. I don't like it. But anyway, everyone, I'm going to end this interesting stream, I think, because I have to get up early. I have to drive into LA, and it's going to be, I can't even imagine the nightmare of driving into LA because there's a big event for the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and that's when I have to be at my mixing stage. So we'll see what happens. And on that note, yeah, we're five episodes away from the 1,000th episode of Robservations. And once again, I want to thank all of your support, all of your generous support via Super Chats and tips and memberships. We are going to have a member call this weekend. So if you're a member, join us like the Evil Dead will. And to everybody, I want to thank you. Tom Jr. Jackson actually is here, so I want to thank him for being a great moderator. And I want to thank you all for joining me on this very impromptu Halloween stream. I hope those of you who wanted to, worship your god Satan, and you brought forth all kinds of supernatural beings. People think I work in Hollywood, so I'm an adrenochrome drinking Hollywood elite. I'm not. Really not. Adrenochrome doesn't work. Doesn't matter how you harvest it. Doesn't work. And you know what's funny about Hollywood elites? Most of the people I know from Hollywood are not from here. They all came here to make movies and follow their dreams. And we all wish we knew Hollywood elites. So one, we could go to those kind of parties. Two, we could drink adrenochrome so we could live forever. But, it's all a myth anyway. I just want to be able to fund my next project, which is not very expensive. And on that note, I'm going to say it again. Every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen if they speak the same language, and it's important to listen. All right, everyone. November 1st tomorrow, Turkey Day is a-coming. All the holidays are upon us, and I've seen Gladiator 2. Thumbs up. I'm seeing Wicked Wednesday, so I can report back. I'm laying out all of the. I'm knocking down everything I need to see. I need to see Conclave. I really want to see that. I remember reading Robert Harris's Fatherland. I want to see Conclave. What else is coming? There's a couple of other things coming. There's some good stuff coming. And, yeah, it's going to be a good end of the year. True Noir. True Noir hopefully will be dropping in a week wherever your premium podcasts are. It's only $2.99 an episode and worth it at twice the price. And I'm just going to stop babbling now. I will see you all. I don't think I'm going to be on tomorrow night, but you never know. You never know. Have a better evening.